Welcome to Thought in Motion, the seminars of Jacques Lacan. Today we're covering content found in Lecture 12, whose title I will not attempt to pronounce because my German is nowhere near that good, found in Seminar 1. Today's video will address the following questions. How do we understand the world of the animal in light of the optical schema? When and how does the human element come into play? And finally, what role does the symbolic play in relation to this schema? If you enjoy this video, please like it and consider subscribing to my channel. To represent the animal's world, the first presentation of the optical schema is most appropriate. In it, we lack the presence of the plane mirror. Instead, we have an eye located in the luminous cone that allows for an integrated perception of the real image. This image consists of the real object and the reflection by the concave mirror. My current understanding of these two components of the real image are as follows. The real object is the environment of the organism, the raw, unfiltered reality prior to perception. The concave mirror has been briefly linked to the cortex by Lacan, by which I believe is meant the neocortex of the brain. If this is accurate, then the real image is the environment filtered through the perceptual apparatus of the brain. I find this interesting because even at this level, the myth of a pure access to objective reality is already shown to be mistaken. The environment is always already structured by the distinct patterns of perception unique to each animal, and that world presented at the basic biological level differs across species. We find perhaps some influence here by the French phenomenologist Maurice Merleau-Ponty. That will be a connection that we'll expound upon later. Now, the real image represents the reflected imaginary structure of the real object. Though we are still in the imaginary, we are at a very preliminary point in its development, one that has not gone past a primary narcissism, which if you recall from the video discussing Lecture 10, is where the structuration of reality begins to take shape, offering an organized totality of reality, but limited to certain preformed frameworks. The animal can find itself captivated by the real image, which in this case is the prompting of sexual instincts for the sake of reproduction. We also find our first glimpses at the death instinct. Here, the death instinct seems to be in service of the eternal substance that transcends the transitory and already dead individual. The individual is already dead in relation to the eternal life of the species. As such, there is very little maneuvering for animals within this schema. Animals are described as getting stuck within a limited number of imaginary conditions that allow it to be easily lured. Such will not be the case for humans. This leads to our second question. When and how does the human element come into play? In humans, perhaps due to their premature birth and underdeveloped nervous system, a gap is created between the pursuit of desire and its satisfactions. The human cannot achieve satisfaction on its own, and so looks outward to locate itself in a perfected state perceived as capable of achieving such satisfactions. At this point, we find the entrance of the plane mirror. The plane mirror, which reflects back an image of mastery in the form of the ideal ego. The subject identifies its desire in this reflected image. Hence, for the first time in this seminar, we get the famous expression by Lacan, le désir de l'homme est le désir de l'autre. Man's desire is the desire of the other. However, this is the immature reflection of a fragmented desire that, in fact, is the other's desire. Of course, this expression will take on several senses. In this particular text, outre is not capitalized, suggesting that we may be dealing with the small o, other, rather than the big other. In other places, such as Lecture 18 in Seminar 6, we'll find the same expression, but with a capital A. Though, of course, nothing is so simple in Lacan as to make such a clear-cut distinction even between little other and the big other. This identifying of desire in the image of the other produces two consequences. First, an exchange occurs whereby the subject projects its image of itself onto the other, and in turn, the image of the other's body, with its imaginary mastery and perfection, is appropriated by the subject and is where the subject locates its desire. This is, according to Lacan, the distinguishing moment of self-consciousness. It is also, and not unrelatedly, what produces a fundamental alienation whereby the self recognizes the other as itself and as its desire. This fundamental alienation leads to a secondary narcissism of the ego, which becomes defined by its failure to recognize itself. Second, a specular dialectic is initiated between one's fragmented desire projected onto the body of the other and the identified mastery of an ideal ego. This gives rise to a second expression of the death instinct, brought about by the virtual image that cannot reconcile reality and imaginary as occurs in the animal world. This form of the death instinct expresses itself in the constraining of libido as it passes through the alienating effects of the imaginary. An interesting implication of this analysis is that we seem to have a psychoanalytic explanation for a philosophical position here, that being the dualism between mind and body. Typically considered a metaphysical proposal concerning the nature of humanity, we find another possible origin for the temptation to think in terms of this dualism. Of course, Freud made similar interpretations as well. This raises a question that is important, to me at least. What is the relationship between philosophy and psychoanalysis? Can psychoanalysis be a legitimate source of philosophical reflection? And in turn, can philosophy be the object of psychoanalytic inquiry? Many philosophers would have a difficult time with the latter, and perhaps even both considerations. To be generous, and maybe partly out of a respect for the legitimate differences among disciplines, but it also concerns philosophy's position of primacy among the disciplines. If philosophical inquiry is subject to psychoanalytic methods, would we not then succumb to a kind of irrationalism? The videos I'm actually doing in my other series, The Thanatonic Phenomenon, is gradually building toward another possibility here. But I digress. Let's return to our final question. What role does the symbolic play in relation to this schema? Because the infant is born in a state of impotence, it seeks out the other, but in that dialectic between self and other, there are mismatches between reality and the imaginary that would be devastating if not for a third party, a mediator. That mediator is language, and the transforming effect of its symbols inaugurates a differentiation that facilitates a new kind of relation to the other. Lacan takes up the example of the name father-son, which redefines and positions subjects in a unique constellation of relationships that's supported by a larger structure, the law, that transcends both individuals. The symbols produced by language, rather than be deployed by the active agency of a subject, supports that subject who is included within it and submits to a network of symbols. Finally, language inscribes a subject in a history. Lacan distinguishes this from the concept of development, which is located within history rather than history being a process of development. In fact, this history is not in any way to be understood in the ordinary linear understanding of time. This is where the title of this lecture comes into play. It means something like the temporality of developmental history. To help get our minds around this, I actually will draw upon the philosopher Claude Romano's concept of time developed in his work Event and World, which he calls the transcendental a posteriori of retrospection. With this concept, he articulates how the meaning of an event can only be given after the fact, après coup. The future reconfiguration of past possibilities is the necessary condition for understanding. It may be something like this, though in a different register, that Lacan means here. Thank you for watching. As always, you're free to leave comments and questions down below. And again, please feel free to like and to subscribe to support this channel. I'll see you next time.